There are moments in life when everything around you looks uncertain. You pray, but you do not see the answer. You believe, but the situation seems to be getting worse. You try to plan, but tomorrow refuses to reveal itself. You look at your family, your future, your finances, your relationships, your calling, and suddenly your mind begins asking questions that have no answers. What if everything goes wrong? What if the door never opens? What if the situation gets worse? What if the person leaves? What if the opportunity disappears? What if the answer never comes? And before you realize it, you are no longer living in today. You are suffering inside a tomorrow that has not even happened. But today, God wants to remind you of something powerful. You are not carrying the future by yourself. You are not responsible for controlling everything. You are not required to understand everything. You are not called to predict everything. You are called to trust God. 1 Peter 5-7 says, "Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you." Notice the language of Scripture. It does not say, carry your cares until you become exhausted. It says, cast them, throw them onto God, realize them. Stop holding what God is asking you to surrender, because worry is not proof that you care. Worry is often what happens when you care about something, but forget who is greater than the thing you are facing. You may be looking at a problem. God is looking at the entire picture. You may see a closed door. God sees what is behind that door. You may see a delay. God sees the appointed time. You may see an ending. God may be preparing a beginning. You may see impossibility. God sees possibility. This is why you must be careful what you allow your mind to believe when circumstances become difficult. Fear will tell you, it is over. Faith says God is still working. Fear says you are alone. Faith says God is with me. Fear says you have no way out. Faith says God can make a way. Fear says you have lost control. Faith says God never lost control. That last truth is the one you need to remember. God has never surrendered his throne because your situation became difficult. He has not become confused because you are confused. He has not become weak because you feel weak. He has not become uncertain because you cannot see the future. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still not because there is nothing happening. Be still because God is still God while everything else is moving. Your circumstances may be changing. People may be changing. Plans may be changing. Your emotions may be changing. But God remains. His character remains. His faithfulness remains. His power remains. His promises remain. And if God remains, you still have a reason to hope. Maybe you came into this message carrying something heavy, something you have not told anyone, something you keep thinking about when you lie down at night, something that keeps interrupting your peace, something you cannot fix, something you cannot control, something you desperately want God to change. Listen carefully. You were never designed to carry what only God can carry. You have responsibilities, but you do not have sovereignty. You have a part to play, but you are not God. You can pray, you can prepare, you can work. You can make wise decisions, you can obey. But after you have done your part, there comes a moment when you must release the outcome into God's hands. Do your part faithfully and trust God with what belongs to him, because some things will remain outside your control. You cannot control another person's heart. You cannot control tomorrow's circumstances. You cannot control every opportunity. You cannot control every outcome. You cannot control how quickly a situation changes. But you can control whether fear becomes your master. You can choose faith. You can choose prayer. You can choose obedience. You can choose peace. You can choose to trust God, even when you do not understand him. And that is where real faith begins. Faith is not saying, I know exactly what God will do. Faith says, I know God, therefore I can trust him with what I do not know. That is a completely different way to live. Because when you know who holds the future, you do not have to be terrified of the future. When you know who holds your life, you do not have to panic over every circumstance. When you know God is faithful, delay does not have to become despair. When you know God is sovereign, uncertainty does not have to become fear. Your lack of understanding does not mean God lacks understanding. Your inability to see does not mean God cannot see. Your inability to control does not mean God has lost control. In fact, sometimes God allows you to reach the limit of your control so you can discover the depth of his sovereignty. You have tried to fix it. You have tried to calculate it. You have tried to predict it. You have tried to manipulate it. You have tried to worry your way through it. And now God may be saying, be still. Not because he has abandoned you, but because he wants you to trust him. So stay with me through this message, because we are going to confront the spirit of worry that has been stealing your peace. We are going to expose the difference between responsibility and control. We are going to learn why you must stop allowing tomorrow to destroy today. We are going to discover what it means to trust God when you cannot see the way forward. And we are going to remind ourselves of one truth that fear desperately wants you to forget. God is not surprised by what surprised you. Nothing caught him off guard. Nothing forced him off his throne. Nothing made him say, I did not see this coming. He knew he sees. He remains faithful, and he is still working. Romans 8:28 reminds us that all things work together for good to them that love God. That does not mean everything that happens is good. It means God is powerful enough to work through everything. Your disappointment can become a lesson. Your delay can develop patience. Your closed door can redirect your path. Your struggle can strengthen your faith. Your weakness can teach you dependence. Your waiting can prepare you for what comes next. God can take what looks like a dead end and use it as a divine redirection. So breathe, pray relish the fear. Stop rehearsing disasters that have not happened. Stop fighting battles that belong to tomorrow. Stop trying to solve problems that God has not asked you to solve today. You have grace for today, and when tomorrow arrives, God will already be there. That is why Jesus said in Matthew 6:34, Take therefore no thought for the morrow. Tomorrow has enough of its own concerns. You have today. Use today, pray today, love today, work today, obey today, trust today. Let God handle tomorrow. You do not need to know everything, you need to know Him. You do not need to control everything. You need to surrender what you cannot control. You do not need every answer. You need enough faith to take the next step. And when you cannot see the road ahead, remember, the God who sees the entire road is asking you to trust Him with the next step. So stop worrying. Stop allowing fear to dominate your thoughts. Stop carrying tomorrow on your shoulders. Stop believing that everything depends on you. It does not. God is still on the throne. God is still faithful. God is still powerful. God is still working. God is still able. And God is still with you. So whatever you brought into this message today, place it before Him. Your family, your future, your finances, your unanswered prayer, your uncertainty, your fear, your impossible situation. Put it in God's hands. Then stand up and do what He has called you to do. Pray, prepare, obey, work, wait, trust and rest, because your peace does not come from knowing what tomorrow will bring. Your peace comes from knowing who will be there when tomorrow arrives. And when you truly understand that, something powerful happens. You stop panicking, you stop forcing, you stop running ahead of God. You stop living in imaginary futures. You begin to breathe again. You begin to sleep again. You begin to pray again. You begin to live again, because you finally understand you may not have everything under control, but you serve the God who does. And if He has everything under control, you can stop worrying and start trusting. There is a difference between having a problem and allowing that problem to possess your mind. Every believer will face difficult circumstances, unexpected situations, unanswered questions, and seasons where the future looks uncertain. But the presence of a problem does not give worry permission to become the ruler of your heart. You can face uncertainty without surrendering your peace. You can face pressure without surrendering your faith. You can face what you cannot understand while still trusting the God who sees everything. 1 Peter 5-7 says, Casting all your care upon Him, for He careth for you. This is not a suggestion to keep your worries close and occasionally mention them in prayer. Scripture says, cast them upon Him, throw them down, release them, hand them over to the one who is strong enough to carry what is too heavy for you. Some of you are exhausted because you are carrying things God never asked you to carry alone. You are carrying tomorrow. You are carrying other people's opinions. You are carrying outcomes you cannot control. You are carrying conversations that already happen. You are carrying possibilities that may never happen. You are carrying fears about a future that exist only in your imagination. Worry makes you suffer twice, once in your mind before the problem happens, and again if the problem actually comes. But God did not give you grace for imaginary disasters. He gave you grace for today. There is a reason Jesus repeatedly called His people to trust the Father. God knows what you need before you ask. He knows the road before you reach it. He knows the battle before you enter it. He knows the answer before you understand the question. You may not see what God sees. You may not understand what God understands. You may not know what God knows. But your limited vision does not limit God's vision. 2 Corinthians 5-7 says, For we walk by faith, not by sight. That means your eyes are not supposed to be your only source of confidence. Sight reports circumstances. Faith recognizes God. Sight says, the door is closed. Faith says God can open another. Sight says, I do not know how this will work. Faith says God already knows the way. Sight says there is no evidence. Faith says God is faithful even before I see evidence. Sight says everything looks impossible. Faith says nothing is impossible with God. This does not mean you ignore reality. Faith is not pretending problems do not exist. Faith looks directly at the problem and then looks higher. David saw Goliath. He did not pretend Goliath was small. He recognized the giant. But David also recognized the greatness of his God. That is the difference. Worry makes your problem bigger than God in your imagination. Faith makes God bigger than your problem in your heart. The size of your fear often reveals where you have placed your focus. If you stare at the problem all day, fear will grow. If you continually replay the worst possible outcome, anxiety will grow. If you constantly listen to negative voices, discouragement will grow. But when you turn your attention toward God, something begins to change. You remember His faithfulness. You remember His promises. You remember what He has already brought you through. You remember the prayers He has answered. You remember the doors He opened. You remember the strength He gave you when you thought you could not continue. Your history with God becomes evidence that you can trust Him with your future. Maybe you are facing something right now that has no obvious solution. Do not allow the absence of an obvious solution to convince you that there is no solution. God is not limited by what you can see. When Abraham could not see how God's promise would happen, God remained faithful. When Moses stood before the Red Sea, the situation looked impossible. When Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, the danger was real. When the disciples saw the storm, the waves were real. But none of those situations were greater than God. What is impossible in your hands is still possible in God's hands. This is why you must learn to distinguish between responsibility and worry. Responsibility says, I will do what I can. Worry says, I must control everything. Responsibility says, I will pray, prepare, and act wisely. Worry says, if I do not figure everything out, everything will collapse. Responsibility produces action. Worry produces exhaustion. Responsibility trusts God with the outcome. Worry tries to become God. You were never designed to be God. You were designed to trust Him. So do your part. Pray, prepare, work, seek wisdom, make the decision you need to make. Ask for help when necessary. But after you have done what God has placed within your responsibility, release the outcome. That is where surrender begins. Some things belong in your hands. Other things belong in God's hands. Do not confuse the two. You can control your obedience. You cannot control every outcome. You can control your preparation. You cannot control every opportunity. You can control your response. You cannot control every person's behavior. You can control what you feed your mind. You cannot control everything that happens tomorrow. Leave tomorrow with the God who is already there. And when worry comes back, and it will try, do not entertain it. When the thought says, what if everything goes wrong? Answer it with faith. What if God makes a way? When fear says, you cannot handle this? Answer it. God will give me strength for what He has called me to face. When fear says, you are alone? Answer it. God has promised to be with me. When fear says your future is uncertain, answer it. My future may be unknown to me, but it is not unknown to God. Do not allow fear to have the final word. Your thoughts need leadership. Your mind needs discipline. Your heart needs truth. And the truth is that God cares for you. 1 Peter 5-7 does not merely tell you to cast your cares upon Him. It gives you the reason, for He careth for you. You are not throwing your burdens into empty space. You are placing them into the hands of a Father who cares. That changes everything. You may be worried about your family. God cares. You may be worried about your future. God cares. You may be worried about your finances. God cares. You may be worried about your health, your relationships, your calling, or your next step. God cares. And because He cares, you can release what is crushing you. Stop rehearsing the same fear. Stop creating conversations that have not happened. Stop predicting disasters that have not arrived. Stop allowing your mind to become a prison built from possibility. Come back to today. Today you can pray. Today you can obey. Today you can work. Today you can love. Today you can prepare. Today you can trust. Today you can breathe. Tomorrow belongs to God. And when tomorrow becomes today, He will give you the grace you need for that day. You do not need tomorrow's strength today. You need today's grace for today's assignment. So lift your eyes. The God who sees what you cannot see is not confused by what confuses you. He is not threatened by what threatens you. He is not overwhelmed by what overwhelms you. He is not surprised by what surprises you. He sees the beginning, the middle, and the end. You see one chapter. He sees his whole story. You see one piece. He sees the entire picture. You see the obstacle. He sees the path through it. Therefore, stop demanding complete understanding before you trust. You may never understand everything, but you can trust someone who does. Faith does not require you to see everything. Faith requires you to trust the one who does. So cast your care upon Him. Release the fear. Release the pressure. Release the need to know every detail. Release the outcome. Then stand up and faithfully do what God has placed in front of you, because worry will consume the energy you need for obedience. But faith will give you strength to keep walking. You are not called to carry tomorrow. You are called to walk with God today. And if God is with you today, He will still be with you when tomorrow arrives. So stop worrying. Stop feeding fear. Stop magnifying the problem. Start magnifying God. The God who sees what you cannot see is already present in the places you are afraid to go. Trust Him. Walk by faith. Keep moving, and remember this. You do not need to see the whole road when you know the one who sees the end. One of the greatest battles in the human heart is the desire to control what belongs to God. We want to know what will happen, when it will happen, how it will happen, who will be involved, and what the final outcome will be. We want the entire map before taking the first step. We want guarantees before obedience. We want certainty before faith. But God does not ask you to control the future. He asks you to trust the one who already holds it. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Those words are powerful because they confront our obsession with control. Be still. Stop fighting battles in your mind that God has not asked you to fight. Stop trying to force doors open that God has not opened. Stop exhausting yourself trying to manipulate circumstances that are beyond your authority. Being still does not mean doing nothing. It means refusing to let panic become your master. You can work without worrying. You can prepare without panicking. You can make decisions without fear. You can take responsibility without believing everything depends on you. There is a difference between responsibility and control. Responsibility says, "I will faithfully do my part." Control says, "Everything must happen according to my plan." Responsibility produces obedience. Control produces anxiety. Responsibility trusts God with the outcome. Control tries to become the author of the outcome. But Psalm 103:19 declares, "The Lord hath prepared his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom ruleth over all." Over all. Not some things, not only the things you understand, not only the situations that make sense. God rules over all. That means your circumstances are not sitting on the throne. Your enemies are not sitting on the throne. Your uncertainty is not sitting on the throne. Your mistakes are not sitting on the throne. God is still on the throne. And if God is still on the throne, your crisis has not become your king. Maybe you are facing something right now that you desperately want to control. You keep thinking about it. You keep replaying conversations. You keep calculating possibilities. You keep imagining what could go wrong. You keep asking yourself, what if they leave? What if the opportunity disappears? What if the money does not come? What if the answer is delayed? What if the plan fails? What if tomorrow becomes worse? But worry keeps asking, what if? Faith asks a different question. What if God is still working? What if the closed door is protection? What if the delay is preparation? What if the disappointment is redirection? What if the thing you lost was making room for something you could not yet see? What if the situation that looks like an ending is actually a transition? Wow. You do not know, and that is precisely why you must trust God. You do not need to know everything God is doing in order to trust that He knows what He is doing. Think about a child walking beside a parent. The child does not need to understand every turn in the road. The child does not need to know every destination. The child simply trusts the person holding the hand. That is faith. You may not know the route, but you know the guide. You may not know the timing, but you know the God who controls time. You may not know the outcome, but you know the God who holds the outcome. That is enough. There are things you can influence, and there are things you cannot. You can influence your choices. You cannot control everyone else's choices. You can prepare. You cannot control every opportunity. You can pray. You cannot control God's timing. You can work faithfully. You cannot guarantee the result. You can obey. You cannot force people to understand you. Your peace begins when you stop demanding control over things God never placed under your authority. Some people are exhausted because they are trying to manage everyone around them. They want to control people's opinions, reactions, decisions, emotions, and behavior. But people are not your assignment to control. They are people you are called to love, serve, forgive, and sometimes establish boundaries with. You are responsible for your response, not for controlling everyone else's response. That truth will free you. You cannot force someone to love you. You cannot force someone to respect you. You cannot force someone to understand your heart. You cannot force someone to remain in your life. But you can remain faithful to God. You can remain honorable. You can remain disciplined. You can remain peaceful. You can remain obedient. Let God handle what you cannot handle. This is why surrender is not weakness. Surrender is strength under authority. When you surrender control to God, you are not giving up. You are acknowledging reality. God, you are God, and I am not. That statement may sound simple, but it is one of the most powerful declarations a believer can make. Because when you stop trying to be God, you finally have room to trust God. You can sleep, you can breathe, you can wait, you can pray without panic, you can make decisions without desperation. You can face uncertainty without falling apart. Why? Because your confidence is no longer in your ability to control everything. Your confidence is in God's ability to rule over everything. Maybe you have been trying to force a door open. Stop. If God has assigned the door to you, you do not need manipulation to make it happen. Maybe you have been trying to convince someone to choose you. Stop. Your identity does not depend on someone's decision. Maybe you have been trying to predict the future. Stop. Your future is safer in God's hands than in your imagination. Maybe you have been trying to fix something only God can fix. Stop, pray, trust. Obey, wait. Do not turn worry into a substitute for faith. Worry makes you feel like you are doing something when you are actually exhausting yourself. You can spend hours thinking about a problem and accomplish nothing. But prayer changes your posture. Prayer says, God, I give this to you. Faith says, God, I trust you. Obedience says, God, I will do what you have asked me to do. Surrender says, God, I will leave the outcome with you. That is freedom. And understand this, trusting God does not mean everything will happen exactly as you want. Sometimes God says yes. Sometimes he says no. Sometimes he says wait. Sometimes he redirects you. But in every situation, he remains God. Your peace cannot depend on receiving the answer you wanted. Your peace must depend on knowing the God who gives the answer. Because if your peace only exists when circumstances obey you, you will never have lasting peace. But when your peace is rooted in God, circumstances can change without destroying you. You can say, I do not understand, but I trust. I do not see it, but I believe. I do not know when, but I know God is faithful. I cannot control the outcome, but I can control my obedience. That is mature faith. The Red Sea did not open because Moses understood every detail. The walls of Jericho did not fall because Israel controlled the outcome. Daniel did not enter the lion's den because he had guaranteed results. They obeyed God, they trusted God, and God remained faithful. Your assignment is the same. Do not demand to know the whole story. Take the next step. Do not demand certainty. Choose faith. Do not demand control. Choose surrender. Do not let fear write your future. Let God lead you into it. You may be standing in a situation that looks completely beyond your ability. Good, that is where you discover that God's ability is greater than yours. Your limitation does not limit him. Your lack of control does not mean he lacks control. Your uncertainty does not mean he is uncertain. You are limited. God is not, therefore, be still, not because nothing is happening, but because God may be working in ways you cannot yet see. The seed grows underground before you see it above the soil. God can be working beneath the surface of your circumstances before you see visible evidence. So stop digging up the seed every morning to check whether it is growing. Plant it, water it, trust God, wait. Some things require faith before they produce evidence. And while you wait, do not abandon your responsibility. Keep praying. Keep working, keep preparing, keep your heart clean, keep your priorities right, keep your faith strong. But stop carrying the outcome. The outcome belongs to God. Your obedience belongs to you. Your faithfulness belongs to you. Your response belongs to you. Your attitude belongs to you. Give God what belongs to God and faithfully manage what belongs to you. That is how you walk in peace. So today, release the need to control everything. Release the people you cannot control. Release the future you cannot see. Reach the outcome you cannot guarantee. Reach the questions you cannot answer. Play them into the hands of God. Then stand up and do your part. Because the God who controls the universe does not need your anxiety to accomplish his purpose. He needs your trust. Psalm 46:10 says, Be still and know that I am God. So be still. Know him, trust him. Obey him and keep walking because you may not control what happens next, but you can trust the God who does. Fear has a way of taking tomorrow and dragging it into today. It makes you experience pain before pain arrives, failure before failure happens, rejection before anyone rejects you, and loss before anything has actually been lost. Fear creates imaginary futures and then convinces you to suffer inside them. But God never asked you to live in a future he has not yet given you. Jesus said in Matthew 6:34, Take therefore no thought for the morrow. He was not telling you to become careless about tomorrow. He was teaching you to stop allowing tomorrow to steal the grace God has given you for today. Tomorrow has not arrived. You cannot live it today. You cannot solve it today. You cannot control it today. But you can destroy today's peace by worrying about it today. This is one of the greatest traps of fear. Fear takes something that may happen and makes it feel as though it has already happened. You imagine the conversation, you imagine the rejection, you imagine the failure, you imagine the financial crisis, you imagine the relationship ending, you imagine everything going wrong. And then your body responds as though the disaster is already standing in front of you. But listen carefully, a possibility is not a prophecy. Just because something could happen does not mean it will happen. Just because your mind can imagine the worst does not mean God has written the worst. You must learn to stop treating every fearful thought as a revelation. Some thoughts are simply fear. Some thoughts are simply imagination. Some thoughts are simply old wounds speaking. Some thoughts are simply the result of uncertainty. Not every thought deserves your agreement. That is why you must guard your mind. Isaiah 26:3 says, Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Notice where peace begins, with where your mind is stayed. If your mind is constantly stayed on the problem, your emotions will follow the problem. If your mind is constantly stayed on what people might do, your emotions will be controlled by people. If your mind is constantly stayed on tomorrow, you will neglect today. But when your mind is stayed on God, something changes. You remember that God is bigger than your circumstances. You remember that God is already in tomorrow. You remember that God has carried you through yesterday. You remember that His faithfulness did not expire when your circumstances became difficult. Your peace grows when your focus moves from what you cannot control to the God you can trust. Think about how much energy worry consumes. You can spend an entire day thinking about something that has not happened. You can lose sleep over a conversation that has not occurred. You can lose peace over an outcome that has not been decided. You can lose joy because of a future that exists only in your imagination. And then tomorrow arrives, and you realize you spent yesterday suffering unnecessarily. Do not waste today's strength fighting tomorrow's battles. Tomorrow will bring its own responsibilities. When tomorrow becomes today, God will give you the grace to face it. This is why you must learn to live in the present without becoming careless about the future. Plan but do not panic. Prepare but do not obsess. Work but do not worship your plans. Save but do not live in fear of lack. Make wise decisions but do not demand certainty. Pray but do not manipulate God for guarantees. Faith prepares for tomorrow without sacrificing today. There is a difference between preparation and worry. Preparation says, I will do what I can. Worry says, I must know everything. Preparation creates a plan. Worry creates endless scenarios. Preparation takes action. Worry drains energy. Preparation trusts God with what cannot be controlled. Worry tries to control what belongs to God. You must choose preparation over panic. Maybe you have a major decision ahead of you. Pray. Gather wisdom. Think carefully. Then move forward. Do not spend 30 days worrying about one decision you could prayerfully make in one day. Maybe you are worried about your future. Prepare yourself. Develop your character. Build your skills. Strengthen your relationship with God, but then release the future into His hands. Maybe you are worried about your family. Pray for them, love them, guide them, but remember that you cannot control every decision they will make. Maybe you are worried about money. Be responsible. Work diligently. Manage what God has given you. But do not let fear convince you that your entire future depends on one bank balance. Your source is greater than your circumstances. Maybe you are worried about something you cannot change. Then why are you spending today's strength trying to control it? Release it. Some things cannot be changed by more thinking. Some situations cannot be solved by more anxiety. Some doors cannot be opened by more worrying. There are moments when the strongest thing you can do is surrender. Fear says, if you stop worrying, you will become careless. Faith says, if I stop worrying, I can finally think clearly. Fear says, you must keep thinking about this. Faith says, give it to God and focus on what He has placed in front of you. Fear says, you need to know what happens next. Faith says, I only need to know the next faithful step. That is powerful because God rarely gives you the entire future at once. He gives you enough light for the next step. The Israelites had to move forward before they saw the complete path. Abraham had to leave without knowing every detail of the destination. Peter had to step out of the boat before he experienced what was possible beyond it. Faith moves with God one step at a time. You want the entire staircase. God may only show you the next step. Take it. You want the complete explanation. God may give you enough understanding to obey. Obey. You want guarantees. God gives you His presence. Trust. Because God's presence is greater than your prediction. You do not need to know everything that will happen. You need to know who will be with you when it happens. That is the foundation of peace. Fear wants you to live in what if. Faith teaches you to live in even if. What if the answer is delayed? Even if it is delayed, God remains faithful. What if the door closes? Even if it closes, God can redirect me. What if people misunderstand me? Even if they misunderstand me, God knows my heart. What if the plan changes? Even if the plan changes, God is still leading me. What if I face something difficult? Even if I face difficulty, God will give me strength. Even if faith is stronger than what if fear, you must stop allowing fear to dictate your emotional life. You cannot prevent every fearful thought from entering your mind, but you can refuse to build a house for it. When fear knocks, answer it with truth. When anxiety speaks, answer it with scripture. When uncertainty rises, return your attention to God. When tomorrow begins screaming at you, come back to today. Ask yourself, what does God require from me today? Not next year, today. What must you do today? Pray today, work today, forgive today. Learn today, few today, rest today, obey today. Today's assignment is enough for today. You do not need to carry the entire future on your shoulders. God never designed you for that weight. He designed you to walk with Him. And walking with God means you do not have to run ahead trying to discover what He has not revealed. Slow down, listen, trust. God is not late because you are impatient. God is not absent because you cannot see movement. God is not silent because you do not have an immediate answer. Sometimes God is doing His deepest work beneath the surface. The seed grows underground before it breaks through the soil. The foundation is built before the building rises. Character develops before responsibility increases. Preparation often happens when nobody can see it. So do not despise today's quiet season because you cannot see tomorrow's result. Stay faithful, stay peaceful, stay focused, stay close to God. And remember that tomorrow does not require today's worry. Tomorrow will require tomorrow's grace. God will meet you there. Isaiah 26:3 gives you a powerful promise. When your mind is stayed on God, He keeps you in peace. That means peace is not dependent on perfect circumstances. Peace is dependent on a stable focus. The storm can still exist while your heart is anchored. The problem can still be present while your mind is peaceful. The future can still be uncertain while your faith remains strong. Peace is not the absence of problems. Peace is the presence of trust. So stop allowing fear to steal something God has already given you. Do not surrender today's joy to tomorrow's uncertainty. Do not sacrifice today's obedience to tomorrow's possibilities. Do not spend today's energy trying to control what belongs to God. Live today faithfully. Tomorrow will come when it comes. And when it arrives, God will already be there. He will not meet you tomorrow for the first time. He is already there. He sees what you cannot see. He knows what you cannot know. He can prepare what you cannot prepare. He can open what you cannot open. He can close what you cannot close. He can protect what you cannot protect. He can provide what you cannot provide. Your future is not resting on your ability to predict it. Your future is resting in the hands of God. Therefore, breathe, trust, pray, prepare. There are doors being prepared. There are connections being arranged. There are circumstances being shifted. There are things God is removing because they cannot travel with you into your next season. And there are things He is building inside you that will become necessary when the opportunity arrives. Your preparation is not punishment. It is preparation for capacity. Maybe you have prayed for favor for years. Maybe you have asked God for a breakthrough. Maybe you have cried over doors that would not open. Maybe you have wondered why other people seemed to advance while you remained in the same place. But what if God was protecting you from receiving something before you were ready to carry it? What if the delay was not rejection? What if it was protection? What if God was saying, "Not yet, because I am preparing you for more"? This message is not about chasing wealth. It is not about demanding blessings from God. It is not about manipulating Scripture to guarantee a comfortable life. It is about understanding that when God gives favor, He gives responsibility with it. And when God increases your life, He wants your character to increase with it. So today I want you to open your heart because we are going to talk about what happens when God begins shaking your life. Not to destroy you, but to move you out of stagnation. Sometimes God shakes your comfort. Sometimes He shakes your routine. Sometimes He shakes relationships. Sometimes He shakes your plans. Sometimes He shakes the very things you thought you needed. And when the shaking is over, you discover that God was not taking your future away. He was making room for it. So if you are in a season of uncertainty, do not quit. If you are in a season of preparation, do not become bitter. If you are experiencing closed doors, do not assume God has abandoned you. And if God begins opening doors you could never open yourself, walk through them with humility, because the greatest testimony will not simply be, "God gave me more." It will be, "God gave me more, and He trusted me to use it for His purpose." Stay with me until the end, because by the time this message is finished, I want you to understand favor differently. I want you to stop seeing blessing merely as something you receive. I want you to see favor as an assignment. I want you to understand why God may be preparing you now, why certain things had to leave, why certain doors had to close, why certain seasons had to end, and why the next chapter of your life may require a stronger, wiser, more disciplined